Coming up, Donovan Mitchell and the Cleveland Cavaliers advance to the second round of the playoffs, taking on Boston. What did it mean for the Brooklyn Nets faithful, desperate to attract the star back to the East Coast? We dive in on it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And game off, we got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. And Doug, game on with the Cleveland Cavaliers beating the Orlando Magic. Of course, with big performances from Donovan Mitchell, they'll advance, they'll play Boston. But as far as we're concerned, this is about whether or not that Game 7 result impacts our outlook on the Donovan Mitchell coming, not coming, going, staying, leaving Cleveland to be a part of Brooklyn.
Well, just a hilarious narrative game here from a Nets perspective, because on the one hand, of course, it all has to do with the Nets. It's all about me, like this, all this. It's all about me. Because on the one hand, Nets fans are probably watching this game and being like, we need some justification for Donovan Mitchell being good enough for, like, this is the kind of guy we want to bring in the door in the offseason. Like, is he kind of like superstar or superstar adjacent, the kind of guy that, you feel really good about maybe unloading some assets for? You also need him to be bad enough so the Cavs lose to be able to have him that narrative even be able to be put forth in the short term, because now they move in advance and you're like, well, I don't know if they're kind of good, like, if they're able to kind of go kind of farther in the playoffs, does he have a better or worse chance of leaving? So really fun yo-yo to be able to watch the game from, because you're kind of want both things to happen. But in the end, Mitchell was incredible in this game, was really the reason the Cavs went back, were able to pull out and win, outscored the Magic 17-15 in just the third quarter. He looked every bit of a guy who could, for a game or two, carry a team in the playoffs for sure. So, we'll talk about the ramifications or what we think they might or might not be, but no doubt about it, at least in Game 7, Mitchell was the main reason they closed this thing out.
Yeah, 106-94 is the final there. They trailed by, could be more than, but at as much as 18 at one point early in this game. So you got all the vibes of, is the supporting cast good enough for Donovan Mitchell? That's the other narrative to come out of this. Well, he looks good enough. He's great, but that team just isn't good enough. And that's why Donovan Mitchell will want to leave there eventually. And I think that's a big part of the push and pull that you and I have gone through, where, okay, look at the supporting cast, which, just as a reminder, third straight game without having Jared Allen. I think that's obviously an enormous factor in how these last few games went inside of this series. But when you look at what Donovan Mitchell did in this one, and you look at the result, and now they'll go play Boston, do you think, because it seemed like there was that narrative out there, well, if Cleveland loses, then that's the reason why Donovan Mitchell will want to leave. Do you believe that? Like, do you believe that it really ultimately matters that they advance out of this series? Because I think either he's having those thoughts about wanting to move on from it, or he's just looking at it as, is this team, Cleveland, going to improve as we continue to advance and I'm still under contract, player option, etc.?
Well, I think if they got bounced by the Magic in round 1, I think we could very clearly say that, like, it would be pretty obvious that he would say that we have gone as far as I can with this group, right?
Even with the Allen injury, you think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think so. Mostly because, an underrated thing here is Garland was horrible in this in this final game too. He was really, really bad. I know he hit a big 3 in the fourth, but everything else was just a total disaster. So I think that if Magic had been able to just aptly close this thing out, because again, they were winning by a lot. If they've been able to close this thing out, I actually think it would be pretty obvious, right? I still think it's probably obvious because there's been so much smoke with this. It's probable fire that he does not see his long-term future in there, that he's not going to re-sign, that he's going to maybe either ask out or just kind of walk away at the end of the contract. I think there's enough there to probably pretty definitively say it. If they give Boston a run for their money and that series goes long, then maybe it's a different scenario. But I think it probably didn't change whatever the ultimate outcome is, except to say it would have been felt like a surefire thing if they had gone down at home here against Orlando. But he willed them not to. I mean, he was, like I said, he was incredible. He was super emotional. He picked Garland up, if you saw on the bench.
Yep.
And like talking to him, and it looked like, for all intents and purposes, this was a great thing. But that's like the heat of the moment battle too. So it's a little hard to say.
Well, I will say at a high level, that's a part of this to me that I find interesting. It is true. Guys want to win. They also want to get paid. They want to be able to go deeper in the playoffs. So the Donovan Mitchell individualistic perspective on this is real. And also, he's in the middle of the playoff series and in the middle of a game 7 of a playoff game. Like he wants Darius Garland to do well, even if he thinks he's not necessarily supporting cast that he needs to advance, right? Like all of those things are about team
for him at all.
Winning. Yeah. Go ahead.
It didn't factor for him at all.
No,
100%. He's going to go out and do it no matter what. I'm just saying, like, the general narrative.
Of course. Yeah. I know you're not putting that on Donovan Mitchell's. Like, what's turning in his head? Do I really want to support Darius Garland here on the bench if I don't think he's good enough to support me long term? Of course not. But that's what I think is amazing just about sports in general, right? All these high level narratives that we're discussing as it pertains to the Brooklyn Nets is such a big factor about what we think is going on here on a game to game, series to series basis. But then from a pure basketball perspective, Caris LeVert comes out of nowhere and gets his scoring back going. Former Net, like just awesome to see him performing at a high level. You get Mobley getting 5 blocks in this game. Like all of those little things that are happening to get you juiced up. It's kind of to your point. What happens next here? And we'll talk about the rest of these playoffs for Cleveland, how it could impact Brooklyn, why Cleveland may be more encouraged to do some different things here to want Donovan Mitchell to stick around and stay. But, when you watch those moments unfolding, it's like every single step forward for the Cleveland Cavaliers bolsters the idea for Donovan Mitchell. Like, okay, I now feel maybe a little bit further entrenched with this group. Again, players want to win. And I think sometimes we also get sucked into what has been the Kevin Durant maybe style of things, the James Harden style of things. I'm not knocking these guys. They're older than Donovan Mitchell. But there is that part of it of, hey, as I get older or I'm a little less team associated, there are still guys that want to stick it out, that want to grind it out and be successful there. Understanding Mitchell went from Utah, obviously, to Cleveland. But it's just interesting to see how these runs will impact players' perspectives on the teams they currently live on. Coming up here in a second, if I could, Doug, what would it look like for Cleveland if they give Boston a little bit of a run for their money? And what moves might Cleveland try to make here to keep Donovan in Cleveland? And how could the Nets battle back against that? We dive into it in just one moment.
All right, before we get into that, tell you about our friends over at Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. There's a little whistle there. You already talked about that. There's just so much good stuff in this game. Got to tell you more about Monopoly Go, where you can team up with your friends for timed tournaments. You're working together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. So much to get to, at least with unique stickers. You can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. You know you love that when you smash the buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every single day. They got constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton of their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or robot pachinko machine. There's always a new timed event to help you win big. Massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. Always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. And when you're done with that, head on over to our friends at FanDuel. There's no better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel, you got NBA rolling, NHL rolling. FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, so much more. I was over there in FanDuel during this game, a little live, plus Cavs, plus 280, plus 6.5 when they were down big. Crushing over at our friends at FanDuel. That's just some what you're going to get. Get in there in mid-game, too, like we were doing earlier today. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, as we continue to roll on this Monday edition of the Locked On Nets podcast, of course, the Cleveland Cavaliers could not give us the fodder we desire. Donovan Mitchell bounced out despite his own personal Herculean efforts. Now it's all but assumed. 1 first-round pick, Ben Simmons contract, and we get Donovan Mitchell in the door. Instead, they advance. So when we think about teams that are going to be possibly in for his services or what Cleveland might do, What has to happen in the Boston series? Because I agree with you said at the top there, this Orlando series, there's kind of only one way it could go. It couldn't be a great back and forth and Cleveland comes up short and Donovan still says, I like what we did here. They had to beat them. I think it's okay. It took 7 games. The Allen injury, plays a factor. What do they have to accomplish against Boston? Is it win and upset them in advance? Or could it be a similar fashion? Hey, we won 7 games. We come up short. But they were tight ones, and maybe that it involves more than just Donovan Mitchell trying to carry the team game over game, right?
I think they'd probably have to beat him. I think that we're probably still in the same territory here. So a couple things to remember about Mitchell here. And this is instructive for like understanding what's going to happen in the Boston, what isn't going to happen in the Boston series. So where he is contract wise right now, he's under contract next year for $35.4 million. Then in 25-26, he has a $37 million player option. There's like no chance he's picking that up because he's just going to get paid more. Like he could hit free agency and get paid way more, or he can get traded and get extended. Like there's just no chance. So like the way he's played and where his age is, at 27, that 37 million is like chump change. Actually, frankly, where he is now, the 35 million is a pretty good contract, right? So there's just no chance he's going to pick up that player option. He's just going to have his options open to him. Now, there are 2 ways it could go, too. He could say to himself, well, I'm under contract in Cleveland for another year, and then I can pick my spot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like going in, and my future team need not unload assets to get me, because so that way I have a chance to be better, right? This is the other thing that sometimes gets missed, is that like, guys who want to move and move, move locations, the other team has to give up a ton of assets, which are then going to inhibit them getting better. I mean, this kind of started with Carmelo Anthony back in the day, where he could have just been a Knick, and they were like, nah, you got to trade us everything, and I got to get there a year early. So I think that's like something to maybe try to remember here. But at the same time, and if they give Boston a crazy great fight, like maybe you're more incentivized to just run out the clock in one more year.
Okay, so
go ahead.
Before we get into specifically the Nets angle of it, and then even the series outcomes of it, right? When you talk about Boston, because there's another side of this in terms of what Cleveland could do as well to try to entice him to stay. But your point about the contract, this is the other thing that I think isn't getting lost. Everyone's aware that he has a year and then a player option. But this idea that this summer is going to be the time when Cleveland's going to pull the trigger on moving him, even if it is for a haul, obviously, what other teams are willing to offer, wanting to be in on the best version of trade packages, certainly. But Cleveland can wait this out at a minimum to the deadline of the upcoming season, and that may not, be the best path forward for them, but it's still an option on the table. They can see what the landscape of the East looks like at the beginning of the year. They can see if other teams make interesting blow-it-up moves and other players become available for them to bring in. So there's just a part of this from a net-centric perspective, which I understand from a fan's point of view. You go, hey, he's not happy there. He likes the East Coast. He's from the area. Great. That means he's obviously going to be coming here automatically this summer. Instead, I think it's worth just remembering there is a long timeline and a lot of things that can change between now and then, which includes Cleveland making their own aggressive pitch that doesn't have to necessarily place them in a spot where, what if we make move X and Mitchell still wants out and we still trade him? You can still go make moves for players that'll still be good and valuable and keep you competitive after a Mitchell trade potentially. So there's more here that prevents it just being Donovan Mitchell is automatically going to leave and highest bidder is going to get him than I think people want to admit, because you want him to be a part of your team or you want to see movement in the NBA in general.
And also too, like it discounts the fact that like he's been really good here, right? Like if you watch Game 7, like he was the best player. We talked about this already. He was the best player in that series, like kind of easily, even though Paolo was looking really, really good, and Paolo played awesome for like how young he is, and he was incredible. But Mitchell kind of willed them to win. It shouldn't be forgotten either that if he were to say, I want out here, it's not just like the Nets are the only group that's just going to be sitting here saying,
no, they're the only team, Doug. That's
well, yeah, this is the best part too, because like there's
who else would possibly be interested in a top performing player that single-handedly helped win a first round series for his team?
Of course. And so like Miami, they would be interested. Now, maybe you want to say the Nets have the best package. We'll see, but Miami would be interested. You would have to think Philly on some level would be interested, right? Like the Knicks even, like, I don't know, they've made their own run here and they've been really good, but and there's lots of reasons not to. And I know everyone's going to say, oh, well, the fit with this, the fit with that. Okay, save it. I understand all that. I'm just saying that teams
Best
are
players.
almost always,
That's what you want. You want best players.
Of course. Teams are always going to be interested in the best players, and they'll figure out the fit later. We've seen this a gajillion times. Sometimes the fit works, sometimes it doesn't. But like in the end, the best players are what the team wants, and they'll deal with the other problems later. And we've seen this so many times. We've seen this time over time where it hasn't worked sometimes, and then other teams will try it. It's like, oh, Harden, KD, and Kyrie, how's that going to work? There's only one ball. Okay, guess what? They ran over everybody when they actually played together. Oh, sure. Gobert, what are they doing there? I don't know. They might beat the Nuggets.
Winning a lot of basketball, maybe.
It's because of Edwards, but like everyone would agree that the Gobert and Cat thing works. So I guess my point is, or is working. My point is that just because these other teams wouldn't seem like a natural fit doesn't mean they're excluded from trying to go for Donovan Mitchell. And if he's going to play like this at the age of 27, the market is going to be pretty robust, you would think, for his services.
And coming up here in the final segment, I want to talk about it Nets-centric and Cleveland-centric. What might Cleveland try to do, and what would the Nets be willing to do? How would it impact them? What would it look like following the trade? But the other thing just to note here as well is when you think about the NBA playoffs, because you mentioned teams like the Timberwolves, okay, they're going on a bit of a run here. Well, and again, as Doug mentioned, this isn't about fit or could they, money, all these other things. I get it. There's all these factors. What if the Denver Nuggets did lose? What if they got bounced out by the Timberwolves here? Are they thinking about, do we need to restructure something? Just a bad break, came up against a really good team. The Suns are in the mix. Are they going to blow stuff up? Anybody's still in the playoffs right now, though. If they don't get out of the next round, especially in the Western Conference, there's an immediate, so what do we need to add here to get ourselves over this hump? And I think that as crowded as the West is right now, if it's going to be that he could be on the move, Donovan Mitchell, I think you're going to see a lot of those teams out there say, well, we need to add a guy like this. We need to add more firepower because it's an absolute gauntlet to get through here. And even when we think we're really good, it still could just be a crapshoot in terms of making it out of the first and second rounds and having a real deep playoff run. So I think that's a big factor here that people are also not considering. The Clippers. What are they doing? I don't know. Maybe they'd like to add Donovan Mitchell into the mix here when Harden walks away, right? So the list gets longer depending on how the playoffs break out here as well.
Yeah, and that's something to factor in. It's like sometimes we can get a little siloed into like it's one team at a time, and it's kind of goes by how you're eliminated, right? Like as you're eliminated is when the teams get brought up into the mix. But you do a good job of looking ahead and be like, hey, there's going to be other teams here that might look at their future and say we could use a guy like this. I mean, I wasn't even joking about it. I was like, just put Mitchell on the Magic, and that team would be Eastern Conference finalists. Like that's exactly what they needed at the end, where they just like literally needed him, right? Like at the and they have the infrastructure around them. So there are other teams, of course, and I should have brought them up first because I was like, they have all the assets in the world also, and they kind of have an awesome young team. So anyway, we got a ton more to discuss here. What this impacts with the Nets, who of course are the only team in the NBA, and it's this whole NBA is net centric. We'll get into more of that here in a second. First, tell you about our friends over at DoorDash. Look, Mother's Day, it's coming down the pike here, folks. You want to be able to surprise that mom in your life with flowers, gifts from the brand she loves. You want to make sure it's delivered the same day. That's where DoorDash can come into the rescue. Look, mom's her a gift. Why not give her the best this Mother's Day? Get gifts as thoughtful as she is with DoorDash. You can select from hundreds of expertly crafted bouquets to the very best tech and self-care essentials and so much more delivered right to her door. Look, this Mother's Day, get something thoughtful for mom on DoorDash. Surprise her from wherever you are with fresh bouquets, latest tech gift cards, self-care treats, and so much more. 50% off of your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 plus over at DoorDash. All your Mother's Day gifts all in one place. Get 50% off that next order. Up to $15 when you spend $15 plus on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order. Now with code LOCKEDON-NBA. That's Locked On NBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply.
All right, so as we tie a bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, and also a bow on the Orlando Magic, who, footnote real quick here, gosh, they're in a really good position to make themselves a better team this offseason as well. Like, as we start to talk about the Brooklyn Nets and what they need to do and how they can be more competitive and trying to get Donovan Mitchell and look at the package, it's like, I mean, the Orlando Magic are in a spot now, man. They got young talent, low-cost talent. They can go ahead and bring in a big name if there's somebody out there that wants to kind of catch on to this young rising star team that's already proven something for themselves, especially over the course of the season, even losing in the playoffs.
So far ahead of schedule, the Magic are. I mean, like, I know they just lost in 7 to Cleveland, but this is such a young team. They have what's close to being a bona fide star in Paolo. Franz was horrible, but I don't know, whatever. Like that can easily turn itself around.
Not to cut you off, but that's such the like, hey, let's get guys into the right roles in the pecking order of a team, right? Like bring another player. Let's get Franz down a couple of pegs, and then he's actually perfect in what you want to have in a
like one more on-ball scorer, and that then it's a wrap on that series, right? Like so, I really wasn't kidding about the Mitchell thing, but it offers a unique perspective around where the Nets are with these guys too, and it's a little. I mean, I hate to go negative here, but it's like a little worrisome when you see some older superstar teams that might still be okay-ish, and then young superstar teams that are ahead of schedule. And now you're like, oh man, like it's an interesting time in the NBA, because if you already think the Magic are a little ahead, if the OKC's a little ahead here, I mean, Minnesota, even if they lost the series, beating Denver in game 1, you're like, I don't know, that's impressive. In Denver, that's impressive. There's teams here that are just, it's not super top heavy, but there's just a lot of good teams. I think that's the way probably to put it.
Yeah, and it was interesting is about in the Eastern Conference, because you start to look about it that way. Hey, this is going to be a fun series, we hope, between the Pacers and the Knicks, obviously. But the Knicks, they're in a good spot. They're probably going to try to add something. Maybe they feel like they're ready to get over that tipping point. The funny thing or interesting thing about the Eastern Conference is Milwaukee injuries. Okay, fine. But what are they going to look like? Boston's clearly at the top of the class here. But everywhere else, you say Orlando coming up a little bit. And I think there's far more fluidity in the East, obviously. But if
you're right. Yeah.
Was that?
I was agreeing with you. I cut you off to agree with you.
Oh, perfect. No. Always jump in. Always jump in if it's to pat me on the back. But to your point, though, it's like, so, but what is the agenda? And we talked about this all the time from the start of, do you go out and add a Donovan Mitchell? Well, to what end, right? What are these other teams in the conference going to do? And if the idea might be, hey, the Orlando Magic are going to get better and Philadelphia's going to try to retool themselves a little bit. We talked about Miami there, Jimmy Butler. We're going to have a full episode discussing kind of that angle coming up this week. But if you think about other teams kind of retooling, it's like, are we going out to get Donovan Mitchell, like just to kind of sort of be in the mix? Like, I think you do have to factor that in, especially as you said at the top. Well, if the price tag is potentially going up for Donovan Mitchell, and let's talk about that now, then what are we really doing for ourselves here? Because there's no world where Cleveland, if they're thinking about it, doesn't look at Brooklyn and go, now I noticed you got a lot of picks from a lot of teams. Go ahead, just start putting them on the table. I'll say when.
So I was thinking about this weekend, and I came to finally something that had been bugging me for a long time. And I hate to even bury this at the end, because I think this is actually, but I know we're going to end up talking about this a ton, like this exact thing, which is, it's been bothering me about the talk around, how the Nets should retool here, right? Like, should they go after superstars? Should they wait for free agency? Should they just blow it up and go back in the draft? And what it ends up starting is this argument of like, well, you could do it every way and there's no right way. And I do agree with that. But there's one key theme of all the teams that are left here in the playoffs. There's one theme.
Talk to me, Goose.
Is that they all got better by getting their best guys cheap. That is the thing. Like, this is the biggest thing. It's like, because everyone's like, well, look, the Knicks added through free agency, or this team did it through the draft, or this team, traded for a superstar. Like, that's all true. But for the theme that runs exactly all the time, the through line through all these teams is they got their best guys and the best assets cheap.
Yep.
And like, so Brunson, great free agency contract. Forget all the guys that are drafted. Those are the cheap guys, because it's way easier to keep your draft picks. So like, that's another cheap angle. Or trades where they didn't have to unload tons of assets, like Josh Hart, right? Like these guys.
Nick, by the way, with OG, as we talked about the time, remember when they made the trade with Toronto was because they have RJ Barrett on a big contract, and they had players to put into that mix quickly that made it so you still kept your powder dry on draft picks for down the road. Yeah,
and that's the thing that I finally like kind of came up with my thesis here, which is like you can do it different ways, but you just have to do it cheap. The Nets originally did it cheap when they signed Durant and Kyrie through free agency. That is a kind of cheap way to do it when the guys are that good. You don't have to give up any assets. You go out there, you give them the best contracts, and you move on with your life, because you want to be able to spend you have to spend the money anyway, right? Like, that is the way. The thing I think that concerns Nets fans the most is that whenever they argue, well, don't do it this way or don't do it this way, they worry that, especially if you're going against the superstar track, everyone would want like these guys on the team. They're concerned about how much they're going to have to pay to do it, right? Like, that's it. Like, everyone would just take Mitchell on the team right now. Obviously, it's that we're going to ship off 2 Suns picks and to do it, right? Like that's where people start running into the problem. So I think as we go into this offseason, the more we talk about these guys, whether it's Mitchell, whether it's Jimmy Butler, or like Brandon Ingram, these guys who are just coming up as like potential guys who could switch teams. The key for the Nets is not whether you want them on the team. It's whether you can do it at a cost that's not prohibitive for doing other things going forward. That's the thing. And the problem that we might end up with Mitchell is, like you said, the cost might end up getting pretty high here. And that's always the concern. That's all. And that's anyway. So like, that's my running. Well, we can flesh this out more at another date,
of course.
But that's my like new running theory is like build any which way from Sunday you want to do it, but just make sure you don't overpay while you're doing it. Because when you start overpaying is where you get really screwed.
100%. And just as the, the framework of this as well, we'll get in the weeds on this a lot further down the road. But the idea of, okay, he's making $35 million. Everyone would say, well, put the Ben Simmons contract in there. So easy, $40 million. Cleveland would still have to clear a little bit off their books to make that happen. You'd also still have to give them something else that they actually want from a player standpoint. And even if that is the starting off point here, Donovan Mitchell, Ben Simmons contract, something else, players or otherwise, but more than the players of saying, oh, do you want to give up Cam Thomas in the deal? Will Cleveland even want him? Who cares? But if the premise is, well, you want Donovan Mitchell to be there to lead Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, right, in a veteran-laden team, then that's actually where I think the draft pick price point rises. Because say you're Cleveland, you go, great, we'll take Mikal Bridges. Just because we know he's a really talented player, a lot of people want to play with him, and he's worth something to us at some point, and the contract is favorable. No, we don't want to give him up. We want to keep him here and play him with Donovan Mitchell. Fine. The price of keeping Mikal Bridges out of this deal is an extra draft pick on top of whatever else you're already giving us. The price of putting Ben Simmons in the deal to have his money count against it, that's going to cost you a draft pick. And that's where I think it just starts to escalate here very quickly. Not even just for Donovan Mitchell, anybody, where it starts to escalate very quickly. And if you're Brooklyn, and if you're Brooklyn Nets fans, and you mentioned this at the top as well, Donovan Mitchell, hey, maybe I do want out. But the other thing I can do is play one more year in Cleveland, pick my destination, and maybe it is Brooklyn. And they don't have to give up anything for me. Just sign me to the contract. Ben Simmons is gone, and we still have all the picks, organization, to go add that other next star to really move the needle for this team. So I think you and I come back to the same point that we always have on Donovan Mitchell of it's not about the talent. We can talk about that fit and with or without Cam Thomas, et cetera, later. But it always comes down to what does it cost me?
Yes.
Where does it get me? And what's the next move? And you can't
exactly
do this in a vacuum. You can't do it.
This is what all the arguments end up coming down to. It's always this. No one ever realizes it because they just get caught on the player. But it's just that or whether or not the player. God,
Nobody loves ice cream. But what's the price of eating that ice cream? Right? It always comes down to something.
Literally and figuratively. And gastrointestinally, there's always a price
emotionally.
Yeah, but and I think that's where everyone just gets hung up. And yes. I think that or gets worried, right? Or they get worried that it's like, oh, it's going to cost us the future to add a player who is clearly would be the best guy on the Nets by a lot. Like,
it's frivolous too. Oh, I want him so bad. Who cares what it costs? You can't do that either, right? You can't. You don't want to be overly conservative, but you also just can't be frivolous, saying whatever it takes. No, there's far more examples of teams that said whatever it takes. Phoenix. And look the situation that they may find themselves now in. You can't commit to that kind of path, I think.
Right, because like the opposite of cheap is like what the Nets are doing now, which is like have your most expensive player not play. Right. And then you sign a free agent guy who, severely underperforms last year in Cam Johnson. And then people worry about with Claxton too. So this is the whole thing. It's just it's just the whole part of no one's disagreeing that these guys aren't like capable. It's just at what cost. So this will be a running theme for us going forward. Donovan Mitchell and otherwise, we're going to get out of here. We will be back again this week. We talk about a lot of these other guys that are hitting free agency, either hitting free agency or maybe hitting the trade block over the course of the season. We'll talk NBA playoffs too as we get into this. What's going to be a really, really intriguing, already started, sort of is intriguing second round of the playoffs. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Hit that like button. And unlike Pat Beverly, I joked about the other day that where he said he wasn't going to talk to anybody if they didn't subscribe to the podcast.
I'll talk to everybody.
I went for a couple of days where I didn't talk to anybody that didn't subscribe to the podcast. Yeah. I'm telling you right now, even if you don't subscribe, I'll still talk to you.
That's a lesson learned, right?
But try to make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets.
Which popular comic book character said this, Douglas? If you're good at something, never do it for free.
Thanos.
That is the Joker.
Oh,
Batman.
I thought it was Thanos. I thought it was. One of the all-time great poets.
Thanos' famous line, I will turn this world to ash because I don't do anything for free. I will need some type of payment plan in order for
it. Just sounded like Thanos, so I don't know. Okay, well, one of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.